From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek will talk about some of the beef calving losses he's encountered when diagnosing those problems for producers in recent weeks. He'll look at what has likely been causing calf abortions and stillborn calves, and how much of that has to do with our weather extremes. Today's Kansas Master Farmer, Master Farm Homemaker profile features Jim and Miriam Nelson of McPherson County. Also today, Washburn University's Roger McOwen looks at what legally constitutes an agricultural nuisance in disputes between producers and neighbors and how that relates to state right to farm laws. And in with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Right here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. As the cold weather seems to not come to an end, calving season hasn't been easy on cattle producers. And it's the time of year to talk about abortions and weak calves. And with me now is Gregg Hanzlicek, Director of Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State. Gregg, what are some factors producers need to keep in mind this season when facing abortions?
Well, it's frustrating when producers have abortions, and most producers are going to have a few abortions, but it's frustrating for both veterinarians and producers in that when we try to do an investigation and try to diagnose the true cause, we only get a diagnosis about 35 to 45% of the time, and that's because a lot of times the organism is gone, whatever caused it, and there's other factors in it. So it's frustrating, but it is important that we do try to figure out what causes those abortions.
And what are the most common problems you guys are seeing in the lab for abortions?
That's a great question. Looking back at last year's results, and this year we're too early in the season to summarize, but last year, of those cases that we actually had a diagnosis, 30% were associated with IBR. And that has increased over the last 6 years, and we're pretty confident in saying the reason we've seen the increase is that more producers are using modified live vaccines on pregnant cows. And there are products out there that are labeled for that, but there's some directions, some stringent guidelines that a producer needs to follow before they start using modified live on their pregnant cows. And if they're not doing that, then there's a risk of IBR abortions. And when we do have an IBR abortion, we're able to actually look to see if the virus is from the vaccine or if the virus is actually from a field strain that's circulating. And a high percentage of the ones we see are actually vaccine-associated IBR.
And lepto and BDV plays a factor in these abortions,
yeah,
correct?
That's number two, and lepto's number two associated disease that we see, and then BVD is number three. And IBR, BVD, lepto, anytime we think of abortions or see abortions, those are the top three organisms. The good thing about those three is that we've got decent vaccines out there, so if producers really want to try to prevent those as much as they can, highly recommend they sit down with their veterinarian and decide on what vaccines to use, and then vaccine timing. The timing of the vaccine is very, very important. So producers, please use your local veterinarian for guidance on those kind of products.
Right, and like you said, it's crucial to have a good vaccination program for your operation.
Absolutely. Without a vaccination program, you're doing one less thing. It's part of your toolbox, so you're doing one less thing to try to prevent these kind of things from happening.
And with this time of year, we also need to talk about stillborn and weak calves. What are you seeing happening?
It's amazing over the last month, the number of cases that we've been involved with that have to do with, and usually it is a combination of stillborn and weak calves. Since I've been at the diagnostic lab for 8 years, I haven't ever seen this much of an issue as we're seeing this year.
And it's just cold weather induced?
Well, we talk about cold weather, but really we look at the top probably 6 or 7 reasons why we see these things is number one, dystocia. Are these calves weak and stillborn because they're going through a calving issue? A lot of times we rule that out and say, no, there was no assistance. These calves were born either dead on their own or they were born without assistance. But the other things that when we see weak calves and stillborns is hypothermia. We have a big-time problem with vitamin A deficiency. We see selenium and vitamin E deficiency. Those two things go together. Nitrate. We can have nitrates in the forages that the cows don't show it, but it affects the fetus. But the one that we've been dealing with in the last couple of weeks that's kind of reared its head is protein deficiency in the diet of the dams.
And what recommendations are you giving to producers to avoid that vitamin deficiencies you are seeing?
Well, all of the vitamin A, selenium, and protein in particular, the best thing that producers can do is to forage analysis on their forages every year, regardless of whether it's the same forage as last year. Have a good analysis done, have a good, proper ration built by somebody that understands cow-calf nutrition. That's going to prevent the protein, selenium, vitamin E, and vitamin A. It'll go a long way to prevent those things.
And you discussed earlier about hypothermia. What do you recommend for prevention of that?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the things that we think goes on out there is that sometimes we don't recognize hypothermia very well. In cattle, they hide all kinds of illnesses away from us. But a calf that's stillborn, sometimes they'll act like dummy. People call them dummy calves. They don't know where their mother is. They don't know how to find the udder and those kind of things. We're talking several-day-old calves. The other thing that they might look like is when they get up, they wobble. They don't track in a straight line. And so if a producer absolutely thinks that any of his calves are hypothermic, just take a rectal thermometer. If it's under 100 degrees in that calf, it is hypothermic and it needs to be warmed up. We want to make sure that we're warming the outside of the calf, but we're also warming the inside. So we strongly recommend that they're given an oral amount of warm milk replacer or warm water with electrolytes, and that'll warm both outside and inside the calf.
Gregg, do you have any final advice to cattle producers to overall improve and have more success this calving season?
For me, or for most of us, most of it's about nutrition, and most of it, once we're into like a protein deficiency or something like that, there's nothing we can really do this year. We just have to plan to prevent it last year. If it's a vitamin A or a selenium issue, actually there's some injections, so we can, if we diagnose that that's what the problem is, we can get the cows and the heifers that haven't calved, run them through the facility and give them an injection of these vitamins or minerals, and that'll help prevent some of those problems yet this year.
And when do you recommend giving those vaccinations, or when is the ending date that you could treat those cows?
Well, you just want to do it as soon as you diagnose that you have a problem. You want to do it as soon as possible because it's going to take a few days even though you're injecting them, for those products to get into the system, get into the liver, and then get passed to the calf. So sooner is better than later, for sure. If in doubt, these products are cheap. If in doubt and you really think that's what's going on, I'd highly recommend you talk to their veterinarian and say, hey, should we do that right now?
Very good. Gregg, it's always a pleasure to have you here. That was Gregg Hanzlicek, Director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State. And you can contact that laboratory for more information on this health condition or other issues concerning your herd health and management at this simple web address, ksvdl.org. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker.
Thanks, Britton. And as Gregg said earlier, nutritional management for the calving cow is paramount up to and through the calving season. In fact, supplemental feeding of the cow herd at this point in the season was among the topics taken up by the Beef Cattle Institute crew here at K-State in their recent podcast. Here's a few thoughts along that line from veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson.
Spring calver either just started calving or yet to calve. I go out, I look at the cows, they're a little bit thin. Where do I start? And what do I need to think about to come up with a supplementation plan?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you look at your available forages. So whether you're using stored forage like hay, or whether you're doing a grazing standing dormant forages, or at least around Kansas this time, there I'll be dormant. That's where you start is what's my base forage? How much of it do I have? Do I have plenty for the cattle? I just need them to eat more of it and digest it better? Or am I starting to run out of forage and I'm trying to stretch it with more of an energy supplement? So those are some of the things that I think about. Typically, if I want to kind of stretch the forage, I'm going to add more of an energy supplement just to get more calories into them. If I'm trying to get cattle to digest a dormant, lower quality forage, then a lot of times they do need a little bit extra protein.
So to do some specific examples, we're out grazing crop residue, and the crop residue is basically gone, and don't have a lot of hay to supplement them with. But we want to give them some hay, but want to make that hay last. So you would say your supplement would be probably
an energy supplement at that point, because I'm really trying to keep. I don't have much forage, and so it might be hay along with one of my supplements. It's a lot of times it's typically a lower percent protein, but it's more volume. And I'm adding more, so I'm delivering more of the supplement to them because I'm really trying to get the energy into them. A lot of times, if I've got plenty of dormant forage out there and I'm just trying to get the supplement, some protein into them, the actual pounds of supplement per day is pretty low because the protein content of my supplement's pretty high, and so just a few pounds of that supplement is enough. So, and that's why you got to be careful talking to your neighbors as far as how much feed you're providing. So basically, kind of a lower protein, higher energy type feed. I'm going to feed more of that to cows that need the extra energy because we're running out of forage. So someone else might be feeding
20% or less crude protein supplement in that case gets the rest of the diet's the energy component or the supplements.
But my neighbor might be might have plenty of dormant forage. It's not very digestible. It's pretty low protein.
We say supplement, though. You're kind of lumping them into categories that they could be high protein supplement, or they could be a low protein supplement where mainly I'm trying to get some energy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so different situations are going to need a different type of supplement. So yeah, just the term supplement isn't all that informative because I need to know more information.
Bob Larson and Brad White of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Catch that entire podcast at beefcattleinstitute.org. We'll return shortly here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Now on Agriculture Today, we'll introduce to you another of the farm couples who've been named as Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers, Class of 2018. They will be formally recognized in ceremonies this Friday here in Manhattan. The program, as always, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension and Kansas Farmer Magazine. You could say that the Nelsons, Jim and Miriam, or Mim, are well-rooted in the farm country of southwestern McPherson County. Jim represents the 5th generation of the family to operate the farm due south of Windham. After graduating from Kansas State University and then a brief stint in banking, Jim returned to partner with his father in the farming operation. Mim, also a K-State graduate, was an extension home economist for a few years before she and Jim made that move to the farm for good. Today, they oversee a 3,100-acre operation, which at one time featured livestock, but is now exclusively a cropping enterprise. And they've stayed on the cutting edge of crop production, from being early adopters of no-till to the latest in site-specific technology. Additionally, Jim and Mim have an enviable track record in community activities and service. Jim talks about how his upbringing guided him down the path to farming.
We used to milk about 35 cows, 40 cows. It was a grade A dairy operation. I felt that it was a great time to grow up in this community because a lot of the neighbors were dairy people. So during that time, as I got into high school, some of the neighbors would want to take a vacation and they would ask us to come over and milk their cows. And of course, then we were putting hay up, and so we'd have neighbors come in and help put hay up. So there was a lot of back and forth. Looking back, I think our we lived modestly, but I didn't know that we didn't have a lot of money because I felt rich. And it was a great place to grow up.
Mim, did you grow up on a farm as well?
I did in Riley County, and it was a small farm, 1/4 of land, and my parents and 4 of us, I was the youngest. I learned the procedures of farming, milking a few cows. A great education on the farm.
Jim, you started out in the banking industry. Back to the farm then. You negotiated with your dad in as far as joining him then?
Yes, it was kind of a brief conversation actually. Told him that I was interested in coming back to the farm. He was willing, and I was anxious to get back to the farm. I enjoyed banking, but at the same time I didn't particularly want to sit behind a desk the rest of my life. And so that was our opportunity. I think Mim felt like she'd married a banker, and not a farmer. But anyway, that's the way it went.
Let's then get right into how the farm has changed over the years. Again, in your early days, it was into dairy, but it went from cattle to hogs and now a strictly cropping operation, right?
That's correct. The first year or so that we moved back, Dad, of course, he'd already gotten rid of the dairy cows. We did that at the end of my senior year. We got into the cow business for a while, but somehow my heart really wasn't into the cows. And the different farm operations I'd seen while being in the bank, I saw that hogs were, at the time, they were the money makers. So I started veering that direction. Then we started backgrounding calves, put together a small feedlot and started backgrounding calves, and then I expanded the hog operation to where we were farrowing 75 to 80 sows, and we would farrow 6 times a year. So it was pretty labor intensive. But we were selling about 1,200 head of pigs a year, farrow to finish.
At some point, though, you moved completely away from livestock.
Yeah. In 1998 was the last year that I had any hogs around. And about that same time with the feeder cattle.
And now it's all about crops.
And now it's all about crops.
Especially devoted to no-till production.
No-till production. 1999, I had a neighbor that came in, and he had a little 10-foot John Deere no-till drill. And he planted 40 acres of soybeans for me. It was a great little crop. And I thought, this is crazy what I'm doing. The year before, I guess it was in 98, we had just bought a new John Deere tractor, a big 4-wheel drive tractor. I had some fairly nice equipment. And in 2000, I decided I'm going no-till. I sold the tractor, I sold the chisel, I sold the disc. I bought an air seeder. And probably the wrong thing to have done to sold the tractor. As I learned later, I probably needed the horsepower around, particularly for grain carts and different things. But that was the beginning of it. And I really haven't been sorry ever since. I mean, it's been very positive.
And then we want to bring you back in here. Were you responsible for record keeping? Where did your role come through here?
Well, always for record keeping. And we often had hired help. The tradition was you provided the square meal deal every day, so there was always that kitchen detail also. So I didn't get a chance to help that much with the animals, but when there was the need, I'm the type who, I'll do a marathon, what do you need, and I'll do it. Kind of the fairing house jobs were like that. I would also ship the pigs sometimes, take them to the collection point. But that was often a little family outing when the kids were young. That was the treat. We got to ship pigs, and bring the paycheck home. Then later, with the kids gone and him going to no-till, really a lot less need for labor. And for several years, we did it by ourselves. The harvest, we could do it ourselves by hiring the semis to haul the grain away. So I spent a lot of time on the tractor with the grain cart.
As you both have pushed this operation forward, then one of the hallmarks of it has been the willingness to adopt new ideas, new technology, and that's a philosophy that you've obviously purposely put into place, right?
That's correct. First of all, I'd like to go back and just say that this farm wouldn't be possible without Mim. She's just kept things really going well for us, and she's been the main asset in this farm, really. Yeah, I've always tried to keep up with new innovations in farming. Starting in about 2010, we got it was 1184 Road Gator. And this thing had auto steer, auto boom height control, auto section shut off, the nice Raven computer. And of course, I'm from the old school, you touch the computer and it's going to break or something, it's going to die.
You call yourself a gears and U-joints guy, right?
Yeah, I'm a gears and U-joint guy, yeah, you bet. Just gears and sprockets and chains, that's what I deal with. Then we get a combine that's computerized, it's got auto steer and it's got yield mapping and it's got all that. I think it was probably in 1998 or somewhere we went to Germany. And one of the interesting things was that I saw over there, the small fields in Western Europe, Western Germany, but they all had tram lines. And I thought, hey, this is something we could adopt. And so when Darren came back and started farming with us, we were an early adopter of tram lines in our wheat and our soybeans today, of course. But it was one way we could go through the fields and not knock down any wheat, but you just get the outside row effect. So we incorporated that on our air seeder, and this year we incorporated section shutoff. Yeah, I think most of everything we've got now has got some sort of computerization on it.
It's a brave new world, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it's really exciting to where this is going to go. I have no idea. I think in 10 years, I think we'll look back and we'll just shake our head at what we're done.
Mim, if you would take a few moments and take us off farm and talk about what you and Jim have contributed to in terms of local leadership. And this list is long, from church to school board, extension, soil conservation leadership. Obviously, again, a commitment to the value of that kind of thing.
It's such a rewarding thing to be in a community where you can interact with people, lead them, they lead you. We are so close to our church. You can see it out the front door.
Physically close.
Yeah, physically close. And so it's always been a big part of our lives and for our families, too. With Extension, our children were really involved in 4-H, and so that brings Extension right into the home. And they benefited greatly, and what we could contribute in leadership was just a benefit to them and everyone else. When it comes to the schools, I was able to serve on the school board for some time. And our most important job was to hire good administrators so that they can hire great teachers. That provides the basis for a good education.
With everything else going on the farm, how easy is it to balance these off-farm responsibilities and commitments then?
Well, they become priorities, and we're pretty good at working and doing things we're responsible for. We're not very good at playing, That's the thing that usually gets left out. So yes, we can get off if we have this responsibility, whether he's a Lions Club president. Earlier this week, tomorrow we serve concessions for the Lions Club at the ball games. It's just a busy life, but it's things that are appreciated, and they bring meaning into your life also.
Jim and Mim Nelson of McPherson County. As this Master Farmer, Master Farm Homemaker series continues tomorrow, we'll tell you about Mark and Joanne Knoll of Brown County. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You are listening to Agriculture Today. And we bring back in for a conversation about another aspect of agricultural law, Roger McGowan. He is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. And the focus this time, Roger, is on ag nuisances, basic principles that apply to nuisance cases. And this is referring to an age-old battle in agriculture, land uses between adjacent landowners or even nearby property owners. There are stories abounding in this area.
Well, I would imagine, Eric, that probably the very first nuisance lawsuit was when you had two adjacent cavemen, and one went out and got the day's kill and burned it on the fire that evening, and it wafted over to the next caveman's cave, and it didn't smell good, and so they ended up in some type of prehistoric court battling out their dispute here. But we do have a lot of land use conflicts in the agricultural area. A lot of it, of course, surrounds livestock operations and associated odors, but we see it with large-scale commercial wind farms and aesthetic issues that arise, the shadow flicker from the blades, but not just with respect to livestock operations and wind farms. We see it in all types of other areas. Maybe somebody puts up, I saw a recent case, it was a spite fence just to block the view of a neighbor of a pastoral scene that they had when they put up their house in the rural area. And so they got into a dispute with their neighbor, and the neighbor puts up a really high fence to block their view and then puts up trees that were going to grow fast to obscure the view. So that's in the nuisance realm too. So even though we think of it typically in this part of the world as livestock odors, it's a lot broader than just that.
So how do the courts codify agricultural nuisances then? That's fairly sweeping unto itself, isn't it?
Well, you used a term there that really is not used in nuisance, and this is not much statutory law. It's not codified. There are some statutes that deal with nuisance issues, but not much. It's really judge-made law, and what is a nuisance depends on the particular facts and circumstances of each situation and how the courts in that particular jurisdiction deal with that issue. You know, a pen of pigs in central Kansas is not necessarily a nuisance, but a pen of pigs at 5th and Broadway in New York City is, and so it depends on the circumstances. And basically that goes back to what the legal definition of a nuisance is, and it's simply an invasion of an individual's interest in the use and enjoyment of their land rather than an interference with the exclusive possession of the land. So reasonableness is the key. Is what you're doing on your property reasonable for that area, and does it unreasonably interfere with your neighbor's ability and right to use their property in a reasonable manner?
Now, there are protections for agricultural producers out there against charges of nuisances, and actually that is written into law in virtually all states, the right to farm provisions, right?
Yeah, this is one thing that's codified. Every state has their version of a right to farm law. And that's designed to protect existing ag operations by giving farmers and ranchers that meet the legal requirements of the statute a defense in nuisance suits. Now, it's something that has to typically be raised as an affirmative defense. So if you sue me on a nuisance theory, I can raise the applicable right to farm law as my defense. So the basic thrust of the statute in any particular state is that it's unfair for you to move out into the countryside where I have an established farming operation and you know the conditions that might be present, and then ask a court to declare that I'm a nuisance. It kind of codifies what we would call the coming to the nuisance defense. I was there, you came to it. I didn't change my operation after you moved out. I didn't expand my livestock facility. I didn't change my manure disposal practices. I've just been minding my business, continuing the way I've been farming, and now you moved out and claim that I'm a nuisance. Well, these state laws are designed to protect those type of farming operations from those types of lawsuits.
Are those cast in stone, or are there some situations where a producer might get into hot water by changing their practices after the offended party moves out.
If you do change your practice after a neighbor moves in nearby, the statute may not protect you. In fact, there was a Nebraska case not too many years ago that indicated that can remove the protection of the statute. Plus, these statutes are different from state to state in the way they operate. Some are zoning-type statutes, some are not zoning-type statutes. But, yeah, if you change the way and the manner and the method of your business practices, maybe expand the size of your dairy herd or your livestock herd, your confinement facility, your hogs, whatever the case might be, that's not necessarily grandfathered in. So you got to be careful in those types of situations.
Don't purposely provoke your neighbors with an action is the point here. There is this provision that farm has to be established for a certain period of time under most of those statutes, does it not?
Yeah, and that varies from state to state. Some may say that you're there a year before somebody comes in. Other statutes may require a longer period of time. But again, no matter how long you've been there, most of the statutes will say that you can't structurally change your operation in a material way after someone moves nearby and still avail yourself of that defense. But again, I would reemphasize on this. When we get to nuisance law, when we're talking nuisance law, relationship with neighbors is absolutely critical. Don't cite a facility that's going to get you into problems with a neighbor if the wind is from where you cited your facility predominantly out of a direction that's going to blow obnoxious odors directly to your neighbor's house. Don't do those types of things. How you handle manure storage and field injection practices. Use a lot of common sense and then use engineering and scientific principles to do it correctly so that you're minimizing, again, possible odors. Plus, I think just a common sense, the way your farmstead looks to the public makes a big difference. If it gives a bad impression to the community, then that kind of sets your neighbors off against you. We may not think that that's a big issue with respect to nuisance, but the way you get along with your neighbors is kind of behind a lot of this stuff in terms of the cases that I see. And so it has everything to do with personal communications between neighbors that can avoid these type of disputes.
All of this is captured in your blog, Roger, on the website that you maintain, and folks can have a look at that. Remind us of where that is exactly.
My website is Washburn-Walter, W-A-L-T-R, and the address is washburnwalter.edu/Walter, W-A-L-T-R. At
washburnlaw.edu/WALTR as well. You'll find that blog. And Roger, as always, we appreciate you bringing these bits of information by. Important matter to all agriculture producers. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Again, this is on agricultural nuisance, this particular write-up. Roger McCohen is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, and he's along with us every other week here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
The trick I use to settle my mind to sleep is surely no more coffee before I lay down.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I have little to no problem falling asleep. Mostly I put my head down and I am asleep. However, it's not always that easy. At times my mind keeps pulling me back. Too much to think about. It can be your children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren. The last have their own grandparents, so I let it go. You think about friends who fight cancer or have other issues. Often there is so little one can do. Yes, you have been there and know the stress of coping, but you cannot take it away from the others. When you say, "I'm thinking of you," it can sound so hollow. I've lived long enough that I've seen praying as we pray does not seem to help. The only way it seems to help is it gives hope. The more you think, the further sleep fades away and you toss and turn. With the windows wide open, you can pick up the night sounds. It won't be long, and I will hear the call of the owl again. In season, it's the calling of the geese flying north. Presently, a huge flock of Canada geese and snow goose are parked on the lake. There were hundreds, if not good thousands, grazing on a field along Mallet Avenue this morning. With the fresh snow Saturday night, they probably wondered what they're doing here. The trick I use to settle my mind is to sleep is surely no more coffee before I lay down. I've tried the advice to eat a thick slice of cheese before going to bed. It has worked. Of course, there are medications available, but I stay away from that stuff. A walk on the hill if the moon shines, even if it is cold, helps and settles the mind. But the best thing that helps me is to take a good walk while my head is on the pillow. I take my mind to familiar places. It can be the farm, but I have to be careful that I do not fall in the trap of starting to think of things I must do. Check the fence, open the gates, remove the fallen trees. When I walk the farm in my mind, I must stay away from the to-do list. I like to walk the trails and remember where I picked up dropped antlers. I try to recall the moment I saw the shed laying in front of me. I concentrate on those things which make me happy. The long vistas over the hills, special rock outcrops. The time I watch the big buck look at me from afar, stomp his foot, then walk off with raised head into the draw. I recall the joy of watching geese on the big pond. I carefully raise my head above the dam, hiding myself. If they sense you are there, they'll swim to the far end or take off with a wide sweep and disappear. I recall getting the ponies in the fall to take them home. Martine and Daniela looked for them, found them, while Tilly and I skimmed flat rocks across the frozen pond. In my dreaming walk, I can hear the ping, ping of the stones skipping the ice. The dreamy walk is all based on happy memories. Another walk I like to take is in the old country where I grew up and worked near Hackford, the old castle. I walk the path through the woods to the fields where cows grazed and crops grew. In spring, the woods are full of flowers, tinsel flowers. The old watermill working or resting. A friend recently sent me photos of her walk and remarked that the small stream which powered the watermill had plenty of water again with winter rain and snow. I walked by trees, I remember, across the narrow footbridge, then back along the field, recently plowed or with a grain crop standing. It all depends on the time of year I think or take my walk. Often by the time I reach the footbridge, I have fallen asleep, because dreaming those walks is really relaxing and clears my mind. I fully realize that I'm at that stage in my life that a crazy exercise like this is not a waste of time. I see it as a reward for getting older. If I were young and I had cattle calving and it was muddy or cold, I most likely would jump out of the warm bed, have a cup of coffee, and quickly leave the house. I would call the dog and start the truck to warm it up. I would go to the cows and keep an eye on them. A few days ago, en route to the farm, I passed a flatbed truck going into town with 2 dead cows on the bed. I still see the 2 heads over the side. 2 dead cows. That is a nightmare. Immediately you start thinking, what happened? Are there more? Too much rain drowning the crops will keep you awake. No, I take the privilege to think the pleasant thoughts. And when I do think back to family, the kids, I trust all is well. Actually, I feel very fortunate that I can sleep. I have known times I could not sleep, even though I was deadly tired. Yes, you do fall asleep exhausted. I do like the word trust. That word trust gives me something to hold on to. I trust my family. I trust my friends. I trust the medical profession. I hope my friends trust me. We have never written an official contract with dealings on the farm. Never. It's trust and a handshake. I trust people to make honest deals. Honesty is as simple and straightforward as trust. And with that feeling, when I walk my dreamy walk, I generally never make it back to where I started. I know the starting points, but I fall asleep. I feel lucky to be able to walk like that while putting my head on the pillow. Sleep well, my friends. Trust.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And with that, today's edition comes to a close. As always, we appreciate you listening in and hope you'll rejoin us here this same time tomorrow. Until then, and for Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today, this is the K-State Radio Network.